Hey, welcome back to part 2 of the Ready State, talking about runner's hips, cyclist hips. Now, in part 1, we talked about ideas of addressing and connective tissue between sort of trunk and hip, right? Seeing these connective tissue muscular systems as integrated wholes that may be just, interrupted temporarily by a little bony stitch, right? All these muscles and tissues are coming down, click, and then they continue on. So it's actually one system with a stitch in the middle of it. So one of my favorite ways, again, you saw from yesterday, the day before, was trying to open up and just spend some time in these end range positions, breathing. But downstream also matters. And we've done this for a minute. And if you've been around the site for a minute, you know how this works. And I'm talking about old school. All I do is just take a bind in the leg. So this just allows me to get a little bit of traction. Now, one of the oldest osteopathic techniques in the book is long lever distraction. Pulling the joint surfaces apart, and then what? Adding rotation. So we can start to bag away or just move away from the band a little bit, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, and that hip becomes long. I start to put a little traction. I can put the arm over my head and then either add a little rotation from the top, right? So I'm getting this nice, beautiful, long distraction, loading these tissues. Then all I have to do is add a little bit of load this way. And instead of just kicking the leg over and then being at the limits, I'm able to bias this tissue first, right? Tissues that are loaded first in range tend to be loaded maximally in range, the way your nervous system is, right? So if I let this go, then use this as a tensioner, I'm like, oh, there's that piece. So this is a wonderful way to lengthen these tissues by putting a little traction. Same way that you would try to sit out with the hip if you're doing that classic rotation pose, but adding this little bit of long distraction here really gives me access to some of these tissues. Then I can work on my breathing and then access these positions. But then the magic is I can start to add some rotation here. So just by adding a little bit of rotation into the hip through this long distraction, I can begin to restore how the hip articulates by getting those tissues to sort of be at end range. I'm doing some active end range motion here in this long distraction position. I start to put the arm over the head and then add the rotation. You're like, whoa, I'm super bound up there. So an easy way to restore function, turn these things on, put a little input into this low back, which tends to get pretty stiff on a lot of our cycling athletes. Either work from the top down or from the bottom up. Meanwhile, we'll meet you in the middle. So improving, unloading, restoring, this is the name of the game.